Over the years, I've been somewhat critical of the Nintendo Switch. I seem to recall a few videos where I came on the channel and said, I think that the Switch is kind of not worth the money because there were so many, at least at the beginning, so many remakes, remasters, not enough interesting titles in their own right, and at that point, not enough unique Nintendo IPs. Well, time has passed, and every summer I kind of take some time, work dies down a little bit, and I go through my collection, and I catalog and recatalog games that I have, and it occurred to me the Switch is now the system for which I have the third most games, coming in at 71 Switch games. And so I feel like in 2023 I need to reevaluate that position and take stock of the collection that I've built. And I think it is actually a fairly interesting collection as I went through at least certain parts of the collection. The Switch kind of stood out as having, or at least I've put together, an interesting grouping of games. But as I was going through it, I noticed this is the system for which I have by far the most sealed games. And that was not deliberate, but it has evolved that way over the course of my collecting. So before we dive in to the games, I want to talk about exactly why this is my third largest set in my collection, but also the most unused. So I've broken down the games I'm going to show today into three categories, and these three categories represent the reasons why I have not opened many of these games. The first reason is simply time constraints. My work has gotten a lot busier over the past year, and I'll purchase games for the Switch and for other systems, thinking that, okay, this is the weekend that I'm going to play them, and I just can't get to them. And of course, there are some cases where I will open a game and play it. You're going to see some examples here, but I can't really get into it, or I can't devote the time to it that I thought. Another reason is I have digital versions of some of these games on other platforms, notably Steam and the Steam Deck. And the Steam Deck gives me the handheld experience, and a better handheld experience than the Switch can give me, although it's more battery hungry and it's a little bit larger. But I do enjoy playing some of these types of games and the genres that I'll show you on the Steam Deck. But also, the game is cheaper on Steam. So I'll, purchase a game and I'll say, all right, I'm gonna play it, get hit with the time constraint, and then 2-3 months later, I see it on a flash sale on Steam or on one of the holiday sales, and it's $4, $5, and I'll say, well, let me just keep the Switch game sealed at this point, and I'm going to play it on the Steam Deck, or I'm going to play it on my beefy PC. So I think that has contributed to the fact that a lot of these games are sealed. And then lastly, I have a lot of sealed games because I deliberately purchase games for my future self. Throughout my life, I've always understood that, hey, I may not have the time to play a certain game. When I was younger, it was because I was playing other games. But if I saw a game at a good price and it looked interesting and it was in a genre that I liked or it was part of a series that I liked, I would always pick it up and then sometimes 3-4 years down the line, take it out of the closet and get into it for the first time. And I found that very rewarding. I was never one of these people who kind of criticize others for just buying things for the shelf or buying games that they won't have the time to play because they're trying to finish other games. I'm not a completionist. I don't think you need to be a completionist. I enjoy the process of collecting. and I enjoy the process of curating for my tastes. So I do realize that, yeah, at the time of purchase, I'm not going to get to it, but I always have the intention to do it. And at this point, I'm kind of thinking like, well, in my retirement, I may get to these. So I want to go through the collection. I want to talk about the games that are in there, the different genres. I'll kind of break it down into these three categories, give you my impressions and reasons for thinking a game might be good, and then be curious to hear what you guys have to say about, are those impressions right? Was it a mistake to purchase these games, or do you recommend other games for the Switch that kind of speak to the tastes that you'll see reflected in this collection? So before we go into my rather large group of sealed games, I want to start with a couple games that I did start to play with good intentions, but played, let's say, less than 2 hours, in some cases less than an hour. And I'll show you some footage from all of these games, except from the Nintendo games, because every time I've ever recorded footage or included footage of Nintendo properties, I get a copyright strike. So being that Nintendo discriminates against small channels, you won't see that footage, but try to give you some visuals for the other games. So the first two are Pokemon games. I really liked Pokemon Arceus on the Switch. I'll talk about it a little bit later in this video, but that game, and I was surprised because I have said here often that I play Pokemon games to relax. I don't really have a nostalgic connection to it, but Arceus was perhaps the only one that really sucked me in, and I really put a lot of time into that one, and it caused me to look at other games, other Pokemon games that have come out on the Switch. I picked up Sword with the expansion passes, and Violet being somewhat similar to the Arceus engine. Didn't dislike them, but never really got a chance to get any further than kind of the opening couple of sequences. Collection of Mana was a compromise game that I picked up when I first got the Switch, shortly after launch, and it was just one of those games that was out. I did play the two Game Boy games that they had on there, which were Final Fantasy games, and I was like, oh, this is reasonably nostalgic, but ultimately I did not continue with it because I was too interested in playing games like Mario Odyssey and the Yoshi's Woolly World, or whatever it was called, the Yoshi Yarn game that came out around that time. Harvest Moon, a series that I have not played since the days of the PlayStation 2, if not the N64. Picked this Harvest Moon game up at a Walmart for maybe $15, and it felt kind of like a budget title. It didn't have the charm that certainly those earlier Harvest Moon games had. And then Civilization 6, this was actually, I think, a pretty good port to the Switch. Again, came out rather early, picked it up for very little money sometime later, just out of curiosity. And again, not bad. And I, again, played it for about an hour, got into that one more turn mentality, and then said to myself, I could have this experience on the PC. It is better on the PC, even though it's well implemented here. But there is some promise there. If you haven't played it on the PC, it's not a bad version, and it's a great game. So might be worth checking out, and it's probably even cheaper these days. And next up in this grouping of games that I actually opened but ran out of time for, we've got Advance Wars 1 and 2. I was looking forward to this game since it was announced. Obviously, it was delayed due to the war in the Ukraine. And picked it up. I want to say I got this day one or day two. Played it for, again, 1 to 2 hours over a weekend and really, really enjoyed it. I had never played the games on the Game Boy Advance back in the day, and had every intention of continuing. Life got in the way. SNK Heroines. SNK Heroines is a game that I thought I would like because I liked King of Fighters 13, 14. I was enjoying King of Fighters 15. I liked Samurai Showdown, the new Samurai Showdown game that came out. I was saying, hey, it's a resurgence of SNK. This one just was kind of like cheap fan service. It had frame rate issues on the Switch, decent sound design for the Switch, but it just something about it just didn't click. It wasn't as good as those other games. I put it down. Shin Megami Tensei 5. A lot of people have praised this game. You can see the quality. I enjoyed the couple introductory missions, and it's a game that I would love to go back to, but it also strikes me as a very large and engrossing game, and just didn't have the time to invest in it. Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 is one that was a bit of a nostalgia pick. I really enjoyed Ultimate Alliance 2 on the PlayStation 2 and hadn't played that game in a long, long time, and I don't think anything has come out in between, so hey, this is a continuation of a series that I really liked and really enjoyed. This one wasn't bad. It did capture that battle system, but also very, very poor performance, I thought, and just never really got back to it. Kirby Star Alliance, I picked this up because I was enjoying the Forgotten Land game, and something about this just didn't work for me. In fact, I can't even remember. I checked my playtime on it. It was in that hour to 2 hour range, but when I went back to it, I was like, I don't even remember playing this game, and I certainly didn't enjoy it as much as I did the Forgotten Land. And Live Alive, or Live Alive, or however you pronounce this, looking forward to this. And this game really did, I think it was wonderful that we finally got a translation of a Super Famicom game. You never thought you would see this in the West, and it has a tremendous amount of charm. I love the graphical style that they went after here. It felt like I was playing a new Super Famicom game for today, but it was very slow. I started, because you can sort of pick whatever scenario you want, and maybe this was a mistake on my part, but I started with the prehistoric times, and I found it to be a slog. So in this case, I may have put in more than the, say, 2 hours I've been talking about, but I just played that scenario, and I said, you know what? I feel like it's so slow, it's just a little bit boring, and I never went back to it. All right, into the sealed games. Next up, games that I have digital versions of for other systems. Sonic Mania, Sonic Racing, I have both on the PC. I have Sonic Mania also on the PlayStation 4. Sonic Mania is a great game. Sonic Racing is just fair. I never really cared for that. But this looked interesting. It's like, oh, a double pack. And I think on the Switch, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the Switch has a lot of those double packs, whereas other systems don't have as many. I like Sonic. I was like, all right, cool. Let's grab the double pack here. Triangle Strategy. This is a game that I've not played at all, but it is one of my priorities for this summer. But I purchased it on a Steam sale, and I'm going to start playing it on Steam, so that's why this one is sealed. But it looks to me like a classic old-school strategy RPG. Reminds me a lot of Tactics Ogre on the PSP, which I really liked. Super Robot Wars 30. I guess I imported this. I don't know if this was an English release. Maybe this was a game I got from Play Asia. But I heard this is a good one. I played this series on the PlayStation 1, PSP, the Saturn, and I read that this was a really good one. They had a lot of different robots from a lot of different series, but found it on Steam sale, played it on Steam. Enjoyable. Need to play more of it, but happy to have the flexibility to play it on the PC and also on the Steam Deck. Friends of Ringo Ishikawa. I had this on Steam actually before I purchased the Switch version. And this is a special game. This is a game where I wanted to have a physical release. It's ostensibly like a Double Dragon or a Kunio-kun game, but it has a really interesting story. You're kind of like not so much an outcast, but kind of like a thug trying to finish up his last year of high school in, I'm going to guess, like Showa era Japan, 80s Japan. And it just takes you on a journey, but in a beat 'em up style. And I had never quite played a game like this. It was really great music. If I'm not mistaken, it was a very small team project or even a one-man project. But it was just one of those, I'm going to say it was a game, let's say in the past decade, that has really stood out to me. And I haven't finished it. I plan to finish it. My save is on the PC, so I'm going to finish it on the PC. But I just needed to have a physical copy. And Eastward is kind of like it struck me as a post-apocalyptic or dystopian Earthbound. And intended to play it on the Switch because Earthbound, Nintendo, but got it for $3 or $4 on a Steam sale, and started it on the PC. And then we have Mushihime-sama, and this is a limited run game. There's a video to be made on this channel about limited run and their business practices. Of course, a lot of people have made videos about that, but it's just been bothering me of late. Nonetheless, I kind of pulled the trigger on this as an impulse buy when they announced it. I really like this game. I'm a fan of the cave shooters. In fact, perhaps the first true compilation video that I did, or review compilation, was of all the cage shooters. So I like these games, but I have Mushihime-sama on PC, iOS, and Xbox 360. So I can't explain why I felt like I needed another one, but I did. Startopia. This is a game that I have on Steam. I always liked the show Deep Space Nine, so I got this on Steam because it was a space station builder with some story scenarios. Never really played it to the extent that I had hoped, but it struck me as perhaps being a little bit more streamlined and interesting to play on the Switch, so I figured I'd pick it up. And then Taiko no Tatsujin Rhythm Festival. I actually have this in digital form on the Switch. It came out, I believe, as a digital-only game initially, and played it. This was the only rhythm game series that I was ever any good at, and I always had fun with it, but North American releases for this series are few and far, physical releases anyway, are few and far between. I'm not going to say that the last one was on the PS2. That was one of the few. There may have been one on the PlayStation 4, but I was like, well, even though I wasn't crazy about this version relative to the PS4 version, and certainly in comparison to the Vita versions, the PSP versions, which is where I kind of fell in love with the series, I felt like, for whatever reason, the Pro Controller, the travel on the D-pad was just a little loose for the precision controls that you need, and I didn't like the other control configurations. I didn't think that, I think they had motion controls, and I didn't think that they were very good. Anyway, I played through the digital version, but just wanted the physical version as a collector. All right, next up we have visual novel games, and this is kind of a hybrid category in the sense that a lot of these are available on Steam, and I do have them on Steam, and I don't have time for them, but they serve one purpose for me, and they are actually sleep aids. I have a hard time going to sleep, And for whatever reason, after I discovered the visual novel genre, of course, I knew it existed for a long time, but I never played one up until Root Letter, which I really enjoyed and I think is a really a remarkable game in and of itself. But then I decided, oh, I'm going to pick up visual novels on the PS Vita, on Steam, and then ultimately on the Switch. And I know I'll never play any of these to completion. I hate to say it, I'm not even all that interested in the stories. A lot of them are just kind of the typical average anime types of things that you could find in various forms of media, but the act of kind of playing a video game late at night, in bed, the pleasant music, the bright visuals, it just makes me very sleepy. And so at a certain point, I was like, oh, I'll pick these games up. Now, they are also collectible. I mean, the first one there, Tokyo School Life, that was not limited run, but it was a limited print run. Arcade Spirits is a visual novel with some component of an old school arcade. Uh, this Koto Dama, that is some kind of Japanese school thing. It was very cheap. Root Film, I actually do want to play this because this is the sequel to Root Letter, but I have not gotten around to it, obviously. Our World is Ended. I have no idea what that is about. Doki Doki Literature Club. This was when I started on Steam, and there's apparently, I Googled this recently as I was thinking about putting together this video, and I found all sorts of like YouTube influencers making videos about this. There's something weird about this game. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's how significantly different it is from the others, but you know, I probably won't get through it at all ever, but it's there. And then this Robotics Notes, I believe, was done by the team that did Steins Gate, which is also a series that I have on Steam and the Vita. And I didn't have this one, so I figured, well, maybe I can give this a shot one day. So those are the visual novels. Again, sleep aids. I enjoy collecting them. I think these are unique North American releases, but I don't take them seriously as games based on my particular use case. So now we're into games that I selected for my future self. And I don't regret having these games in the collection because I know one day, I don't know when that day will be, but one day I will open one of these and it will give me some enjoyment. So the first two, really, these are also limited run games, perhaps the first ones that I purchased, I believe. And the River City Girls Zero and Double Dragon and Kunio-kun, I had purchased these because I talked about this a year or two ago. I really loved the River City Girls, the original River City Girls game. It was a game that I played with a buddy of mine just on a whim. It was on Game Pass, I think, and it became like our most played game together. And he's not around a lot, and for like 2 or 3 Christmases, we played River City Girls and River City Girls 2 more recently. So I was like, you know what? There's a nostalgia there, and a very recent nostalgia. It's an experience, a gaming experience that I'll take with me. And it's become like a personal classic. So I just wanted to get other games in that series. Monster Crown looked like an interesting mixture of something like Stardew Valley and Pokemon with Earthbound-style graphics. And I've played a similar kind of Pokemon spin-off on Steam. I think it was called something like Nexius or something like that. And it wasn't bad. So I thought, well, maybe I'll give this a shot. RP Golf Legends or RPG Golf Legends. I enjoyed Golf Story on the Switch, which came out in digital form around, I'm not going to say at launch, but in the first year maybe. And I wanted a sequel to that. This is not a sequel to that, but it showed that you could actually make a fairly enjoyable game that was a mixture of an RPG and an old school golf game. This looked to be very much the same. Cotton. I was going to say I remember playing Cotton on the TurboGrafx 16. I didn't have it for the TurboGrafx 16. Otherwise, I could probably buy a second home. But I played it on emulator, and I enjoyed Cotton. And I think they've re-released it on various platforms. So I think this is a new version, or maybe a remaster. I'm not exactly sure, but found it on an Amazon sale or a Woot sale, and I was like, okay, for $20, worth adding it. Darius, G Darius HD. This was recommended somewhere. I read that this was actually a very good version of this game, and I'm not a huge Darius fan. I've never been great at side-scrolling shooters, and certainly this was not one of my better ones. But again, for $20 on Amazon, I thought it was worth it. Alex Kidd, this was a sub $15 purchase, and I have one of the Alex Kidds on the Master System. Can't remember which one at the moment, but maybe about 8-9 years ago when the Hyperkin came out, that I forget what it was called, the Hyperkin with all the different slots, and then you could get the Master System adapter. I had played it, and I just figured, I never played any of the Master System games that have been remade for newer systems, so that's why I picked this one up. Deadly Premonition Origin. I have never really been one to play a lot of Japanese horror games, and I've heard a lot of people say, they can be really interesting. And then, of course, when I decide, okay, now is the time I want to play them, they explode in price and are untouchable. So I got this on an Amazon sale, one of their daily deals. I don't know what it's about, but I've heard that it's a series, and maybe around Halloween, just to set the mood, I'll give it a shot. Pocky and Rocky. I know very little about this remake. I think this is a remake, or no, I don't think it's a remake. I actually think this is its own unique game, but in a similar style to the SNES game, which I really enjoyed. Actually rented from Blockbuster, I believe, back in the day. So figured I'd give this a shot. Ghostblade HD, East Asia soft shmup, vertical shooter, and it kind of looked like the Crimson Clover. I reviewed that game on the channel now, probably about 10 years ago, and really enjoyed that, and it had a similar aesthetic. I don't know if it was from the same company that made that one, but I like shmups, and this is one that I can see myself opening pretty soon because you don't really need the huge time investment. Baldo and the Guardian Owls. This had like a Ni no Kuni look to it, and I read a recommendation for it somewhere, so it was on sale, picked it up. The Mary Skelter games. I know very little about them, but I think they had a couple on the PS Vita, or at least one on the PS Vita, and it looked interesting, and it's become very pricey. So they're not quite visual novels, so I didn't include them in that. They do actually have some RPG gameplay, or at least some versions do. I think maybe Mary Skelter 2 is more in that traditional RPG style. But anyway, I got these as gifts from my wife, so one day I'll get to them. Snack World. This is a level 5 game, and level 5 games these days don't seem to be that frequent, and I don't know if they're out of business or they were acquired by someone, but level 5 has put out some excellent games. I'm thinking of Attack of the Friday Monsters, which I reviewed on the channel. I'm not really sure what this is about, but it's a favorite developer, so I wanted to give it a shot. Next up is Rico London, and this was a blind buy. I just saw this as I was browsing through Amazon one day. It looked to me like a Borderlands-style game in a die-hard atmosphere. Try to make your way up a hotel or a building or something like that. I'm not sure if it's a boomer shooter. That's a term I discovered recently, and I was like, I've never really played a game in this genre, but I figured for under $20, it was worth a try. The Spooky Spirit Shooting Gallery. This is one of those games that I just love to collect for. It is a North American release of a quintessentially Japanese type of game. I have no idea why it was released here. It's a motion control game. Basically, as I understand it, it is a digital version of a type of shooting game that you would play at a Japanese seasonal carnival. And it's honestly something that sounds odd, and I picked this up actually at full price, and more for collecting sake. A lot of people, I've read some reviews online, they say it's utterly terrible, but again, it's one of those things that you typically do not find here, and I love those kind of localizations. Mercenaries Blaze, another limited run game, really pissed me off because the shrink wrap is like ripped in the back, and I got it that way. And I mean, for a company that caters to hardcore collectors who probably don't open their games, that's a problem. This looks like a standard old school strategy RPG, so I picked it up. Bravely Default 2, love the series on the 3DS, and figured I'd give it a go on the Switch. Blue Reflection 2. Blue Reflection it's a pretty expensive game now. The original one, you can still get it on a Steam sale, but I missed out on the original, so I picked this up. I doubt I will ever get to it, but since I was always interested in that first one, why not? Captain Tsubasa is a game that I know has been around for a little bit. I enjoy Japanese sports anime, but I've never really seen or read Captain Tsubasa, so figured I'd give it a go on the Switch. And then the Coma Double Cut. This is a compilation of the Coma Recut and the Coma 2. These are side-scrolling horror games. I don't know if this is Japanese horror or if this game comes from Korea. It might be a Korean game. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, it seemed like an interesting package, and since I want to get into that genre, I figured I'd pick it up. Next up, we have The Legend of Heroes Trails from Zero. This came out, I believe, earlier this year, and it had the style of the Legend of Heroes Trails games on the PSP, the 16-bit looking ones, which I never actually played on the PSP, but rather on Steam, and really love those games. I've only made it through one and a half, so who knows when I'll ever open this, but they were just exactly the type of old school RPG that I like. I had to go with this one. Monster Hunter Stories 2. I never got into the official Monster Hunter games, but I did play a little bit of Monster Hunter Stories on the 3DS, and I felt like it was, for my tastes, a more palatable kind of representation of that series. And I think that game is also fairly rare, so I was like, well, let me pick this up for the Switch. And then we have Wonder Boy. The Wonder Boy games I got into a little bit over emulation not too long ago, and I have one of them on the Master System that I played on the Hyperkin, as I was talking about earlier. So I figured, this was pretty cheap, and unlike some of the other, I think there were some Monster Boy or Wonder Boy games that maybe I'm conflating these series now that I'm talking about them. But anyway, this had that Monster Boy 2D style, art style to it anyway, but it was appealing and a little bit better than, I think there was an earlier release on the PlayStation 4 that really had a kind of pastel look, and this looked more like an old school game up-resed for today. So um, I wanted to give that a go. And then we have these NIS double packs. So again, I like the double pack. Um, Phantom Brave and Soul Nomad, and I played Phantom Brave on the PS2, so I enjoyed it. I didn't finish it. I have no idea what Soul Nomad is. Mackay, Hunter, and La Pucelle, and Rhapsody. All of these games basically take me back to that PS1, PS2 era of, I don't want to say second tier RPGs, but off the grid RPGs. And they may well be from that era. I'm not sure. I've only ever played Phantom Brave here, but when I looked at the art style and the type of game that they were, I just said, you know what? These look interesting. Maybe I'll get to them one day. All right, so you might be asking if you've made it this long, and I doubt few have, but what games am I actually playing, or what games were shrink wrapped and that I opened and spent time with? And that's going to be the end of this video here. Now, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, I did a video review of the original game on this channel. It is one of my most beloved games as a child. Maybe my favorite game of all time. I would really need to think about that, but I had an amazing time with that game. So when they announced that they were going to do a remaster of it, I was on board. Absolutely loved the art style, that kind of plasticky sheen that everything had. And I played through half of this game, and it honestly pissed me off. It had the frame rate issues, and a lot of people talked about it, that slowdown, that kind of those hitched graphics at certain points. And it really ruined the experience for me. This game should have been a buttery, smooth 60 FPS. And I can only hope that when they release a new Switch, that it's backwards compatible and I can enjoy this game at a steady and silky smooth frame rate. Talked about Pokemon Legends Arceus earlier, and this was a game that I picked up. I mean, look, if you're a collector, I mean, Pokemon games are always a good bet. Everyone loves them. They're not rare, but they maintain their price or they increase in value. But this one came along at a time when I didn't have anything to play. It may have been the only new release around a weekend where I actually had some time. So I picked it up, and I was sucked in by this game. I like this open world Pokemon style that they went for. Now, it is another game that suffers graphically. The frame rate dips a lot. The textures are, really, really rough looking. But the style of game that they created captured me in a way that really no other Pokemon game has captured me. I said that I have no nostalgia for Pokemon from when I first started playing them on the DS, actually, and then I went back and played some of the older ones and the 3DS ones. It was stress relief. It was like, okay, this is an RPG. I always found them to be very kind of easy, but because of that, I didn't have to really, once you understood the types of Pokemon that are strong and weak against each other, you don't have to do a lot of thinking, but you could have an RPG experience and just chill out. I played them, but again, I just used them for that stress relief component. This was the first one that really, I really wanted to play this game. I really wanted to get into this game. I was sinking hours into it. I didn't finish it, but I really enjoyed the 10 or 15 hours, or possibly more, that I put in when that came out. Cruisin' Blast. This was a game that I purchased because I was like, oh, 90s, Cruisin' USA. I forget, what was the San Francisco 2049. It looked like those types of games. Raw Thrills, to my knowledge, they just stick to the arcades. I can't think of another release that they had. So I bought this because I was like, oh, this is going to be somewhat collectible. And it looked kind of cheap from the screenshots and stuff like that. So I don't know if I played it immediately, but maybe within a week I cracked the shrink wrap and really enjoyed this game. This was a fun game. This is the type of game that if you grew up in the '90s, you will enjoy. And there's not a lot there, admittedly, but finished it, unlocked everything, had a good time. Shadowverse is a game that I picked up because I thought this kind of looks collectible. I like games that are free to play but have physical releases. And I believe this came out on Steam as a free to play game. Yeah, your typical kind of high school anime aesthetic. But what it is Hearthstone skinned differently, that, at least on the Switch version, you don't need to actually pay to play. You unlock your deck. And I like Hearthstone. I like the concept of Hearthstone. And I decided, oh, let me open this up and play it. I just guess I was feeling like, well, if it's Hearthstone, I want to give it a shot. And it was very enjoyable. And I mean, when you think about it, if you got into Hearthstone, the problem with Hearthstone to me was, you know what, I don't want to play it competitively, but this is a really well-made game. I want to just play against the computer or have a story mode or something like that. Now, I haven't played it in probably 8 years, 7 years maybe. So maybe they added that. But at the time, it was like you had to pay for the cards and build your deck, and it was a highly monetized game. This gives you all the fun of Hearthstone, I think, and you don't need to invest more than the cost of the game. And this game became very cheap. It's not collectible at all. You probably get it for $15-20. So really enjoyed that one. Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Really, really great game. I never really liked the motion controls of the Wii. It never really clicked for me. So to play Mario Galaxy with a controller, that was why I bought this, and I much preferred it with the control scheme they had in this version. Kirby and the Forgotten Land. This is a game that completely, surprised me. I thought it was like a post-apocalyptic Kirby game. I can't get into this, but I bought it. And to me, this was like an N64 platformer of the highest quality. This is one of those games, I've talked about this previously on the channel. This is one of the games where I like to savor it. I want to have more of it to play. So when it came out, I probably for maybe 3 weeks, I put a lot of time into it. It's like any Kirby game. It's not a hard game. So I was going through it at a pretty good clip. And of course, there's side missions and collectibles and stuff like that. But I stopped because I was like, you know what? I want to have at least, 2 or 3 worlds left for some point in the future. I think those are the best games for me where, I don't want them to end. And Kirby was one of those games. And then we have here the Cowabunga Collection. I got this not expecting much. And from Konami these days, why expect much? But this was actually a well put together, well curated collection with enough quality of life improvements that you could make it through some of these harder games. Sometimes it was just save states, rewind. Other games had their own cheat codes and stuff like that. Not to mention all of the kind of source material and drawings and stuff like that they included. So it was really worth playing. I had a good time with it. It took me back. I played a lot of these games when I was a kid, so it was a good pickup, surprisingly, from a company that I think we've all grown not to trust. And then we have Chocobo GP. This is the Play Asia release, although the English version, we didn't get a U.S. physical release, I don't believe, but this was like a game I was looking forward to. It was like, oh, you got Mario Kart. You have the Square Enix characters. How could you go wrong? And things went very wrong. It was just kind of a generic game. It was grindy. It had microtransactions. I didn't really enjoy it, but I did play it enough when it came out, if only because I was looking forward to it. Haven't gone back to it since I got this. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but again, I always like physical versions of digital games if I can get them. Then we have the Japanese release of River City Girls 1 and 2. I got this because I said, went through it all a while, I like River City Girls, and my buddy was, I was going to meet him around Christmas time this past year, and we had finished or gotten close to finish. I think we actually finished River City Girls. And then we wanted to kind of continue that, so I thought I had ordered the River City Girls 2 from Limited Run. I can't remember what version I got. It wasn't the Switch version. It was, I think, PS4, PS5. But, we had planned to play it, so I got it from Play Asia. And I have to say I was disappointed with River City Girls 2, at least on the Switch, because it had frame rate issues. In fact, I was like, oh, let me just buy it on Steam. But then I heard that it was glitchy on a lot of platforms. So I don't know if they corrected that. We'll have to see the next time we go back to this game. The Ninja Saviors. This is not a long game, but it's a game that just hit me at the right time. I got it as a Christmas gift. I vaguely remember the long 3-screen Ninja Saviors in the arcades back in the day. Obviously, this is a game that the Happy Console Gamer has always talked about. So I recall maybe playing it on and off back in the day. But this was a really good version. It had a CRT look. I'm guessing it's a sequel to it. I don't know if it didn't strike me that this was the actual game, but this was a return to that style. I don't know. I'm not going to call it like Prince of Persia style graphics, but that kind of limited movement, 80s aesthetic. You really have to be precise and plan your attacks, and it was a lot of fun. I think this is one of those games that I will definitely go back to on the platform. And then Metroid Prime. I mean, I love the original Metroid Prime, and this was a great remaster. When you talk about things that the Switch can't do, which is buttery smooth graphics, this was buttery smooth. It was such a... I didn't finish it on the Switch version. I did back in the day. But I played, a good 8 to 10 hours of this one. I made time for this one. I would like to go back and complete it on the Switch, but even if I don't, this was just a classy, really premium remaster. Every remaster should aim for something like this. It was great. So these are the Switch games that I did open and that I have played. So there you have it, my Switch collection as it stands in the summer of 2023. And as I said, I think the Switch has become a console with a very interesting mix of games. Sure, you have the Nintendo first-party games. You have the high-quality remasters that Nintendo has put out, but you also have just a number of odd, different games that may have previously only existed, say, on Steam, but get the physical release. And there's a fair amount of creativity here. So it has its own distinct personality, and I think that's a good thing. I only hope that at this Nintendo event that they're doing in Seattle, I think it's in August or September, that we hear about a Switch 2 or a Super Switch or whatever you want to call it that will have backwards compatibility and allow a lot of these games to be played at higher frame rates and that kind of give you a better experience. Because I think one of the reasons that I have not opened a lot of these, and one of the reasons why the Switch doesn't get a lot of my gaming time, it's that the games might be interesting, but the actual gameplay experience suffers due to its technical limitations, and I really hope that gets corrected soon.